Good evening. Hello, 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 hello. I'm late. I'm always late. I'm late. I'm late. I'm like the white rabbit in Alice in Wonderland. Alison? Alice in Wonderland. Yeah, late, flustered, slightly harassed, endlessly looking at my watch, trying to do too many things, trying to sort out the filing, get the 6-year-old to do piano practice, make sure that the 8-year-old's cello lesson is sorted out, and so on and so forth. Honestly, I don't know. Here we are. So I've propped my phone up slightly differently. So please be patient with me because it's a bit short on charge. So it's got the cable plugged in the bottom. Anyway, here we are. It's 5:05. It's time for another chapter of The Demon in the Embers. We're on chapter 12 now. So we're a good long way through. I was going to say, for anybody who's come to these videos on either YouTube or Facebook and hasn't found their way to the website that goes with this series, this is it. And my slightly dodgy mirror handwriting, sorry. So this is the website for the series, and you'll find all sorts of extras on there about different parts of history. Timelines. There are timelines, there are recipes, there are things about famous people from that particular period in history. So yeah, do go along and have a look, because there's all sorts there. And if you decided you ever wanted to buy these books instead of just listening to them, you can get them from me and I'll sign them for you, which is way nicer than just getting them from Amazon. Or that's what I think anyway. And you'll get a free bookmark and everything. Amazing. So yes, do go along and have a look, see what you think. There's lots there, and it is written for kids. It's all for kids. And if you're doing anything on history, if you've got one of these periods of history to do, so you'll find stuff on Romans from the first book, and Vikings, and Tudors. And this is the Restoration, Great Fire of London. So this covers the period of the Great Plague and the Great Fire. There's also Georgians and the slave trade, because that's what's coming up next in the series. And Victorians, and the series finishes with World War II. So there's stuff about all of those things on there. So yeah, we're on chapter 12. In a minute, I've got some sort of knot in my hair. We're on chapter 12. Joe is back in Lucy's time. He's to and fro quite sort of swiftly in this book. He's back in Lucy's time. The fire has started and he has witnessed some of it. It's already been, I was going to say the start of it, but he hasn't seen the start. It's been burning for 2 days already. And he makes his way back to Lucy's house, not knowing what on earth he's going to tell her family about where he's been, because he left her house in the middle of the night after they'd just invited him back. So Lucy opens the door and she says something about Tobias. She says, I said I'd heard Tobias drag you out of the house. You did say to blame him after all. And she says something to her mother about, he must have heard that Tobias is gone. And so Ellen, Lucy's mother, says to Joe, tell me, where have you been these last 3 weeks? What happened to you? Chapter 12. Joe flicked a glance sideways at Lucy. It would have been good to talk to her before he had to answer, but it was too bad. He would just have to be vague and hope he didn't accidentally contradict what she'd told them. It seemed that Tobias didn't want me here, madam, he said cautiously. Lucy said he bundled you out of the house in the night, Ellen said. I can't believe we didn't hear it. I don't know why she didn't wake us. We could have stopped him. It wasn't quite like that, Joe said. He asked me to go with him. I didn't like to say no. I told her not to wake you. I didn't want to disturb you. I didn't think it was anything serious. He shot another look at Lucy. She nodded. Well, she did wake us after you'd gone, Ellen said. She was worried, and rightly so. We caught Tobias letting himself back into the house alone. He claimed he'd had no idea you were here. He denied having taken you anywhere, and then he came out with some fantastical story about you having vanished in front of him. But he refused to say what he wanted with you. In fact, he barely spoke another word from that night, until he disappeared. When was that? Joe asked. Yesterday morning. One of my husband's colleagues woke us early to tell us about the fire. The warehouses along the river had caught light already. It's been so windy. It was an inferno down there, with all the timber and hemp, and the tar and pitch for the ships. There were casks of oil, too, in one of the warehouses. That went up in minutes, my husband said. He went straight down to see if any of his stock could be saved. He took Tobias with him. But Tobias slipped away in the chaos, Lucy said, her voice heavy with meaning. Nobody's seen him since. Joe frowned. Tobias had talked about raining fire on London, but his ambitions had been altogether grander. Was it possible that he'd abandoned his idea of a coordinated attack on King, Parliament and City in favour of a simple baker's shop? That didn't sound like the Tobias he knew. "At least you've come back," Ellen said, "though I confess I'm surprised to see you. Where have you been?" "I wandered into the countryside," Joe said, "through some of the villages." He thought quickly. "There was a kind old lady who gave me a bed and food in exchange for chopping wood and fetching water." That seemed plausible enough. He watched Lucy's mother carefully. She seemed to accept what he was saying. Encouraged, he went on. "News of the fire reached me last night. I thought I must see if I could help you and your family. I felt bad that I'd left your house like that. I should have stood up to Tobias. I decided I'd come back, even though I thought it would mean facing him again." Ellen paused, her hand halfway to the packing box. "That is uncommonly kind." Joe realised she was on the edge of tears. Yet again he hated himself for deceiving her. He forced a smile. "It's the least I can do, after the kindness that you showed me." Lucy's mother pulled herself together. "Would you mind, then, going out quickly to find out where the fire has got to, so that we know how much time we have? I hope we're safe for a while at least, but my husband went out at dawn and called by just before dinner to say that there are many who've left it too late. We must be prepared," he said. "He's gone with Peter to the exchange. The stock in the warehouse was all lost, but at least what's in the shop can be saved." "May I take Lucy with me?" Joe asked. "I don't know the names of the streets, so I wouldn't be able to describe to you where the fire is." "Very well, but don't be too long. We need to pack up. And take care. I can't lose my only remaining daughter, and you do seem to have a habit of disappearing." She smiled wanly. This time, Lucy didn't waste a moment getting ready to leave the house. Outside the front door, she squeezed Joe's arm. "I'm so glad you came," she said. "I've been really wanting to go out and see what's happening, even though I know it might be dangerous. But my mother would never let me go alone." Joe grinned. "I'm happy to be here too," he said. He looked into Lucy's eyes. Something shifted in his chest. He dropped his gaze. "I just hope I manage to stay a bit longer this time," he said. In the street, the crowd was denser than ever. Almost nobody was moving, despite a good deal of jostling and shouting. Joe sniffed the air. He didn't think the smell of smoke was any stronger here than it had been last time, but something had obviously happened to block the roads. "Goodness!" Lucy exclaimed. "There's a pair of spinets on that cart." "What are they?" "Musical instruments. You know that painted box we have in the front room." Joe remembered the thing Lucy had been playing like a piano the first time he'd come to the house. "I can only see one on the cart," he said, puzzled. "It is only one," Lucy said. "Oh, you mean like a pair of trousers?" "What are trousers?" Joe shook his head. "Forget it. It doesn't matter. Look, there's someone in a bed. I saw another old man in his bed earlier." "Poor things," Lucy cried. "Imagine losing your home when you're so old and sick you can't even get up and leave." "I don't understand why nobody is moving," Joe said. "It wasn't as bad as this before." "Maybe there's a problem at the gate." "What gate?" "Bishopsgate. It's one of the gates in the city wall. There are 8. Bishopsgate isn't far up there." She gestured along the street to the right. At that moment, a small gap opened up in the crowd. At once, Lucy took her chance and squeezed past a cart and along the street to the right, in the opposite direction from the way the crowds were going. "So, where did you pop up when you reappeared?" she asked over her shoulder, as though it was the most normal question in the world. "Round behind the Pewterers' Hall," Joe answered. He kept as close behind her as he could. "I was more or less where we were when you left me, although Tobias did drag me out of the alley. I tried telling him I was his guardian angel, sent to stop him setting fire to London. I thought it might be the only way to get him to give up the idea, if he thought God didn't want him to do it. But he didn't believe me. He said I'd have to help him start the fires. He was just pushing me back along the alley when I disappeared." They stopped again, stuck behind a young man who was trying to manoeuvre an empty handcart the wrong way through the throng of people. "So what Tobias told my parents about you vanishing was actually true?" Lucy asked. "I guess so," Joe said. "He didn't recognise me in the alley. But I suppose once your parents started asking about me, he must have worked out that's who I was. Anyway, at least you got away. I've been so worried. Did he realise you'd been there with me?" "I don't think so," Lucy said. "I did find those papers he was telling the others about. They were under a loose floorboard in his room." "Where are they now?" Joe asked. "Buried in the sand barrel in the kitchen." "Why there? That's hardly the most obvious place to put them." "Exactly. Anyway, I didn't want to put them in my chamber in case Tobias came looking for them. I didn't want him to know it was me who took them, and I couldn't put them in any of the other bedchambers because everyone was sleeping. I thought about the House of Office, but there's nowhere really to put them in there. And anyway, he could easily search it while he was pretending to use the close stool. The kitchen seemed best. It's usually quite busy, and he has no real excuse to go in there, except to wash his hands. When we've decided what to do with the papers, I'll move them." At last, the handcart pushed on. Joe and Lucy stepped in behind it, letting the young man drive a path for them through the hordes of people. "Does he know the plans are gone?" Joe asked. "I'm sure he does," Lucy said. "I lay there listening after he'd come back. He waited until he thought everyone was asleep again, and then there was all sorts of scuffling, and the sound of things being moved in his room. He was trying to be quiet about it, but it sounded like he was getting more and more frantic. He was white as a sheet at breakfast the next morning." "But he didn't say anything?" Lucy shook her head. "That's good, I suppose. It means he doesn't know it was you. I wonder what he thinks happened." Lucy considered. "Maybe he thinks it was you. If you disappeared in front of him, he might think you'd reappeared back at our house, taken them, and vanished again." Joe nodded. It was certainly possible. In fact, that was an idea he'd once made use of himself to trick Tobias back in Jorvik. "Or he might just think I'd found them already," he suggested, "and that was why I'd followed him to the meeting place." They were still making very slow progress along the street. Perhaps this was a bad plan, Joe thought. The flames he'd seen earlier had been moving faster than this. At this rate, they might be overtaken by the fire before they had a chance to report back how far it had got. "Did you tell anyone what Tobias was planning?" he asked. "No." Lucy bit her lip. "I wanted to talk to you about it first. You do realise he could be hanged for plotting something like that, even though he didn't get as far as doing it?" Joe swallowed. He didn't like Tobias at all. In fact, he loathed him. But he couldn't bring himself to wish the boy dead for something he hadn't actually done. On the other hand, Tobias was a terrorist. You couldn't sit by and wait for terrorists to attack. Once you identified them, you had to do something. "You don't think he started the fire, do you?" he asked. Lucy was thoughtful. "I don't think he could have done. even if you wanted to. My father was so angry with him for going out in the night and for forcing you to go with him that he moved Solomon's perch to outside Tobias's bedroom door. Tobias couldn't have got out without Solomon screeching unless he climbed out of the window. And if he did that, I'm not sure he'd have got back in, certainly not without Solomon hearing. Joe suddenly realised there hadn't been the usual welcome from the monkey today. Where is Solomon? Gone, Lucy said. They had stopped again, pressed up against a house, while another cart edged through. It seems as though he sensed the fire somehow. Maybe he heard it or smelled it. Anyway, he waited until Peter had let him off the leash yesterday, and then made straight for the kitchen window. Isn't that just coincidence? Lucy shook her head. I don't think so. He could have done it any number of times. The windows have been open all summer because it's been so hot. She shrugged. My father says it's an ill wind that blows no good. Joe looked at her. I don't understand. The fire may be coming, and my father has lost a lot already, Lucy said. But on the positive side, he's not sorry to see the back of either Tobias or Solomon. She grinned. Peter was upset, though, about Solomon. He didn't find him as annoying as the rest of us. Finally, whatever had been holding up the crowd gave way, and people began to move forward more quickly. Lucy and Joe were able to move too, even though they were going against the tide. Joe couldn't help feeling excited, even though he knew he should feel sorry for the people who'd already lost their homes, and those who were going to but didn't know it yet. Maybe Lucy's house would burn too. It seemed likely. And yet he couldn't believe it. Bad things like that happened to other people, not to his friends or family. Regardless of all of it, being in a crowd like this with her, and knowing they were both safe, he was exhilarated to be part of something big and important. It still took them quite a while longer to reach the junction down at the stocks market. The street was less jammed here because it was broader, but it felt more chaotic. People were hurrying in every direction rather than heading mostly the same way. There were a lot of shops being emptied here, as well as houses, and still the endless heaps of possessions piled up in the street. It's no good, a man nearby was saying. There just isn't a cart to be had. People reckon that carters from all around have driven into London to pick up the extra business, but I still can't find an empty one anywhere. It's the Dutch, said his neighbour grimly. I heard they've bought most of them off. This is revenge for Terschellen. They want us to burn in our beds. They're blocking the city gates to make sure we can't get out and stop the carters from coming in. It's not just the Dutch, a third man joined in. It's the French as well. They're in league with the Dutch against us. He spat on the ground. Filthy frogs. Didn't you hear? The baker's where it started is run by a Frenchman. He set fire to the place on purpose. That's not true, Joe muttered to Lucy. It was an accident. Whatever it was, she replied, we need to get on. My mother will be starting to worry soon. But the three men had been joined by others. In seconds, quite a crowd of people had gathered, and Joe and Lucy were stuck right in the middle of them. The voices around them grew louder, each shouting to be heard over everyone else. I heard the baker had been planning it for a month, cried someone. It's not the man who used to run the place, called someone else. A Dutchman bought it for a small fortune just 2 weeks ago. I heard they hadn't done any baking there for weeks. That's because it's a safe house for Catholic spies from France. Didn't you hear? A ship came in on Saturday with only half its cargo. The rest was packed with Frenchmen, hundreds of them in the hold. I heard it was Dutchmen. Lucy and Joe shrank down, unable to escape. Then there was a cry. There's one of the scoundrels now. Abruptly, the crowd dissolved. Joe let his breath whistle through his teeth, relieved that he and Lucy could press on. But Lucy cried out, Oh no! Joe followed her gaze. The mob had surged along the street and surrounded a man on his own who was dressed slightly differently to everyone else. There was shouting, and almost at once fists began to fly. In the middle of the mob, the foreigner put his arms up over his head. A few seconds later, he slipped from view, but still the mob raged around him, punching and kicking wildly. At last, their fury spent, the men stepped back. Joe saw one brush the dirt from his hands. Several straightened their clothes, and another turned away, red-faced. 2 crowed triumphantly. In less than a minute, they had dispersed to their houses and shops. Beneath his crumpled cloak, their victim lay still. As Joe and Lucy watched, blood seeped out from underneath his hat, making a puddle on the dry ground. So that's the end of chapter 12. Poor man, in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sounds a bit familiar though, doesn't it? With some of what's still going on today, hundreds of years later, when somebody looks a bit different from everybody else. Yes. Anyway, there we are. That's it for today. So I'll be back tomorrow for chapter 13. And then, as I think I said to you on Monday, I won't read on Thursday because it's my son's birthday and I might have better things to do. So we'll have chapter 13 tomorrow and chapter 14 on Friday. Okay, so I hope to see you for those then. See you soon.